everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on our second higher ed video content. With me today for this special edition of a webinar series specifically for higher education, I have some really hard hitters. We're going to be talking about social media and listening. With me is Ken Sterling. He is the professor of practice and EVP of marketing. I've got Victoria. Victoria is the associate director of social media at Central Michigan University. And Taylor is also here with us, communications specialist from Oklahoma State University, Center for Veterinary Medicine. I hope I got all of that right. I want to welcome you guys here to talk about listening and higher education. And I have to tell you, I've heard a lot of buzz about this. Ken, can you welcome, and then can you let everybody know, what is your relevance to the topic of social media and higher ed for our audience?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Teresa. Always good to be back. And in addition to being in higher ed, I've also been a marketing thought leader, an expert author, keynote speaker for about 15 years. And over the last 5 years, my zone of genius has really been in social media, influence, all the different platforms, and just the huge paradigm shifts that we've been seeing in terms of social media. And if we were all in a webinar like this 5 or 6 years ago, and I told you that email newsletters and sending out shiny pamphlets and leaflets would be a thing of the past, and that people would be making enrollment decisions and application decisions based on things that they're seeing in social media, you probably would have laughed at me. Well, the time is now and it's here. And I love that we've got all these schools. And what's interesting is I'm at a state university, and so are Taylor and Victoria. So we may not even be the most entrepreneurial or business-minded schools out there. I also am embedded at USC as a researcher, and everything I've been doing the last 2 years has been on influencers, social media platforms.
Yeah, Ken, your breadth of experience is so exciting and so relevant to this topic. You're going to add so much to this discussion. I appreciate it. Taylor and Victoria, though, are going to bring that practitioner sensibility, the people that are actually out there in the trenches, actually doing the work. So, Victoria, tell us a little bit about the spot that you kind of occupy in higher ed as far as social media is concerned, and why listening is relevant to you guys today.
Yeah, so as an associate director of social media at CMU, my role at the university is to be the subject matter expert for everyone on campus. We use listening tools to pretty much test out different types of content. We're able to decide what content is good versus bad, or in other words, what content performs and what doesn't, and what increases enrollment based on the subject that we're talking about or the type of content that people want to see. So it just helps us be less siloed at our university. It helps us with, tracking engagement. It helps us come up with better content ideas. For TikTok, we've consistently been one of the top 10 higher ed TikTok accounts throughout the US. And it's because we track social listening and our analytics, and we're so serious about it.
Yeah, Victoria, I love what you guys are doing. And I would say that I feel like your best practices are kind of in that top 10% category. So I know you're going to bring a lot of really practical, juicy tidbits. I hope everybody has their pen and paper out. And Taylor is with us. She is from a veterinary medicine center. So she's got an interesting niche in the whole higher ed scheme of things. Taylor, welcome. Tell us a little bit about this, how social media affects you at your institution.
Thanks, Teresa. So I manage all of the social platforms for the College of Veterinary Medicine at Oklahoma State. Specifically for us, we've got a lot of different audiences as it pertains to social. So of course, we're recruiting students. We've got prospective students. We also have our alumni that stay really in tune with all of our channels. But then we also have the client perspective and referring DVMs. So the veterinary advice perspective of things too. So we use social listening for students to stay really current on what they're looking for in a university, specifically in a professional school, because they've already been through 4 years of an undergrad institution. And so they have a really good perspective of what they're looking for. And so we try to stay really up to date on what they're looking for in terms of their veterinary education and future career opportunities that they can have when they pursue a degree at OSU. And then specifically for our veterinary audience, we've got clients, we've got other veterinarians that are coming to us for advice, for information on specific things. So we use listening to track what's going on in the agriculture sector, in the pet sector. We serve all of those different groups. And so if there is a disease outbreak or an increase in canine influenza, we need to be on top of that. So that we're a resource that people are going to use things like that. And so we use social listening for that as well. And to kind of see, we also look at what some of our competitors are looking at. So if they're talking about their new equipment that they have in their hospital to teach students, then we're sharing that, what we've got, in regards to that as well. So we use social listening for various different audiences.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you're using it for thought leadership and kind of community development and activism. That's a super interesting use case. And I know that Victoria, we've talked before, you also have an enrollment aspect to your social media, which Taylor, your where you sit with enrollment is different. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation. The slide that I have up now just kind of frames one of the questions that I've been hearing as I've been talking to higher ed people, which is the advent of this conversation. So I know I need to be on social media. I know to be active, but I don't know what to post. I don't know how to be relevant to each of the groups that we're serving. And the answer to this question is listening. So let's jump right into the conversation. We've kind of alluded a little bit here to what social media listening is, but let's define it for this conversation. It's the ability to monitor online conversations. Those can be, as Taylor mentioned, what your competitors are doing, what they're talking about. It could be what a certain group of students, right down to veterinarians, veterinary interested students are doing. It could be something related to your industry. It's what you want to listen to. You can actually set those parameters. It's responding to things. So listening also includes responding to comments and conversations that are happening. And it also is the ability, social listening is kind of the action of taking those relevant discussions and relevant messages and then boosting them. So all of this kind of falls into the discussion we're going to have today about social media listening. Ken, did I leave anything important out?
Not at all. I just want to double click on what you're unpacking here, because I think this is important, and especially, bless you, especially to some folks who think, oh, I don't understand social media. A lot of this goes back to basic org comm theory and basic marketing theory. And when we talk about listening, there's a difference between hearing and listening and active listening. And there's a big difference between reacting and responding. So having a good strategy around this, and that strategy is the monitoring. It's being thoughtful, not just reacting, really being thoughtful about what are the kinds of comments and engagement we're going to be getting? What are the kinds that we want? What are the things we're going to do when we see something that is off brand? Because again, a lot of this stuff is brand related. And, what's the brand of the different schools? A veterinary department and kind of your brand and what you're doing, versus undergrad enrollments and things like that, USC, UCs, all these schools. What's your brand? What are you trying to do? What are the things that are going to be coming up on these feeds that you need to be mindful of? Or what are the seeds you need to plant to get more engagement? Because by doing that, then the listening comes. But listening isn't just, hey, let's check our feed and listen.
What I was going to say is, out of this deck, out of these three things, none of them are passive. Sometimes listening sounds passive. Listening in this case for social media is absolutely not passive, and there has to be action behind it. Action to set up what you're going to listen to, and then responding to it and boosting it and making it part of your strategy. So Ken, thank you for saying that. This is such an important part of having a strategy around social media. Taylor, Victoria, anything that I left out here is like defining social media or maybe a way you're using it that I didn't cover?
No, I think Ken made a great point about the action that comes after listening and how it's all coupled together. And that, especially for our audience, is so crucial because once we see something and once we see, especially when I was talking about those topics that come up specific for us, we have to be on top of those in a really readily available way. So I think that is the key component. If it's 50% listening, it's 50% action too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And we're always adjusting our strategy based on what we find in our social listening.
Oh, yeah, it's critical. And the next slide that we're going to talk about is why it matters. So we've already literally covered most of this, why monitoring matters. If we really need to drive home why you should be watching this webinar, it matters for all the things we talked about: relevant topics, protecting your reputation, uncovering what your competitors are doing. I think we talked a little bit about trends, Taylor, when you were talking about like diseases that might be happening that are relevant to your audience. But, what's happening, what's trending, topics that are trending can be a great source of content for you. One of the things we didn't talk about yet was identifying supporters, people who are out there creating content on topics you care about or even about your institution, and then how you can use all of that to craft compelling content. UCG, user-generated content, or UGC, is a very interesting topic, especially for higher ed, for me anyway. The idea of having students out there talking makes me nervous. Victoria, what are you guys doing as far as user-generated content? Do you actively have students posting, alumni posting on your behalf?
Yes. So there's people that will just do it out of their own free will. When that happens, we use Agora Pulse. We use social listening to identify those people. We try to keep the conversation going. If we see someone doing that and it's great content, then we will try to connect with them and then help them make more content. Or we will connect with them and make content for us in collaboration with them.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we also have a campus ambassador program where, we use social listening to identify those people as well, people that can be influencers or micro-influencers on campus.
So, Ken, this terrifies me, but it's very common. I saw a lot of it in the industry. What's your take on, having these outside of your purview contributors to content? Like, are you giving it a full embracing thumbs up, or are there cautionary things we should be thinking about?
Since we're in the academic setting, all of the above. I think where we're at as a society, right? Like we elected a reality TV show person president. More people know the Kardashians or the D'Amelios than their senators or their governors. We're in this culture of transparency. Now, whether that's curated transparency and it's real or fake is a whole other discussion. People generally want authentic, vulnerable conversations. And if we're talking about listening, that's conversation. So inviting these outside people to contribute, let's call them contributors, I think that's a good thing. And I think there's a lot of learning. And, one of the things that I'd love to learn more about in this session is what the two schools and departments are doing about, monitoring, editing, censoring some of that content, because that's also interesting. So, okay, you're going to allow outside collaborators and contributors. How much are you going to moderate them? And what's your rule book for flagging or deleting inappropriate content? I think sure, if you can get outsiders to talk about your brand and evangelize your brand, and sometimes controversy also is interesting and engaging. And in social media, lots of research and studies out there that show controversial posts actually get more engagement. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that's what the metrics and the data are showing us today.
Right. You're correct. I appreciate the insight to allow that a little bit of free reign, but to keep an eye on it. And we are going to talk a little bit in this next slide about response time. So that's going to really address the question you had brought up that I also want to hear from Taylor and Victoria on how they're managing that, responding to things in real time, because that's what listening allows you to do. So if you're not actively listening, the nightmare scenario is that a comment could happen and you not see it until 3 or 4 days later. And so one of the things that listening does that's so important, and I think especially for higher ed, is it brings a potential problem or a conversation to your eye line, maybe before it would naturally pop up, which allows you to grab things and address them before they spin out of control. And it allows you to control the narrative. I think that's a really important part of listening. So Victoria, and I'm going to ask both of you, but Victoria, when you have something on your social that is inflammatory or upsetting, what's your policy for handling that?
So at our university, we have language in the bylaws that we promote free speech. We cannot censor comments. We do not delete comments. If there's spam that is clearly spam that are bots, then we will choose to hide those comments because it's very obvious that it is spam and not a real person. But aside from that, we do not mute people. We don't delete comments. We don't do anything of that kind.
Wow. So do you respond to it though? Do you get in there and engage with the people, or you just leave? What's your policy? Or you just leave it alone?
It really depends on what the type of comment is. So one interesting thing about our org structure with our social media at Central Michigan is that the social team lives on the university communications team. So everyone that is involved in crisis communication is on our team.
Okay.
So we see social media as that first, we're the frontline people that everyone is coming to when they have comments or questions. And a lot of times we see things first. So when that happens, we just inform the greater team and we have a discussion immediately about it. We actively monitor, on an hourly basis. So we're pretty on top of comments, and we can.
But you don't delete. That's your policy. You don't hide. You don't delete. Taylor,
Correct.
How about you guys? When something pops up that's inflammatory, do you hide? Do you delete? Do you address? Do you monitor? What's your policy?
So we don't hide comments either. But the difference for us, because we are so closely tied to the agriculture sector, we can have some activists, trolling our channel. So what we do is we filter specific verbiage that is, we never want to distinguish a conversation that could lead to something positive or just engaging with someone and answering their questions. But we've got some hateful speech and some specific words that we filter out of our comments to kind of prevent some issues before it even starts. And then when we do have things that pop up that may be negative toward our college, we kind of have a similar process as Victoria, where social media is really just a part of what I do for the college. So we are essentially the crisis response team specific to the college as well. So we work really closely with our leadership in the college. And then we have the university brand management that oversees those college channels. And we can choose to escalate it to that if we need to. The biggest thing is keeping them informed. And they do the same as well if they get things on their channels in relation to our college. So we just try to stay really open with communication, and when it merits a response, we will. And when someone is willing to have a conversation with us, then we absolutely engage in that in a positive way.
Ken, does any of that surprise you, or is that about what you expected?
A little of both. And by the way, I'm actually refreshed. Hats off to both schools for not censoring content, which I think is important. And, especially the ethos of education and the ethos of what we do, and also mostly government funded institutions. I think, yes, following the tenets of the First Amendment are going to be very, very important. And what's interesting, and you and I talked about this in a previous session, Teresa, is that sometimes those negative comments can be opportunities to really listen and to step in and to address things. And it's these elephant in the room things that maybe you can't have an FAQ page of all these things that people are going to say. They do this, and that gives you an opportunity. Like, they opened the door, you didn't have to open the door. And like that opportunity to really shine as an institution, being on brand and being gracious about how you engage with haters on stuff, I think could be a really neat thing that you can't really buy. Like, you can't go hire a PR agency to do that stuff. So I like that you're embracing that.
Yeah, I do too. It is artful though. And the highest form of that art to me, and I've seen it done brilliantly, where you take somebody who is a hater and you're able, most of the time with like kindness and truth and patience, you actually turn that into an experience that even if it isn't positive for the poster, maybe you can't reach that person. They're so angry and hateful, but it is an opportunity for you to show the grace by which, your institution shows people that they differ with. And I think that's, like you said, you can't buy that. Okay, so we're going to put some action here. So I know we talked about how the fact that listening is not a passive activity. It is actually a very active, and it is probably step one for all of your action that you're going to take on social media if you have it integrated into your system. So one of the things that we talked about is that listening allows you to identify conversations that you want to magnify. And there's a lot of benefits to magnifying content. So let's give an example. You set up a listening alert. You get notified that this conversation is happening that's very meaningful. And then you can jump in and make a comment. You could repost it. It would allow you to take that great content and boost it, magnify it. So that is I think that might even be I might even call that an advanced usage of listening, magnifying those conversations. But Taylor, do you guys do anything to magnify positive content that you're finding out in the world?
I think the biggest thing for us when it comes to students is when students are accepted into our program, they share that a lot on our social channels. And so we always try to, anytime someone tags us, we always try to engage, welcome to the CVM. We're so excited to have you. Congrats, #future DVM. It's making them capitalizing on the fact that they are prideful in the fact that they got accepted to our institute is the best recruitment tool I think that we could offer, because that is organic people like buying into your brand. And so that's a perfect example of how we use that and we capitalize on those opportunities.
That is such a great example. And I can tell you, I watch those even though they're for schools I've never heard of before. Those are great videos. What a life moment to celebrate with somebody. And I love that you guys actively jump in and boost those. How about you guys, Victoria? Are you boosting this kind of stuff when you see it and hear, when you listen and hear it online?
Oh, yes. So Central Michigan is a very culture-based institution. We actively live out our brand pillars as much and as often as we can. And we really cultivate this, this energy with our students and our alumni. So when people post about us just on their own, we love sharing it because our motto is fired up. We're always fired up about whatever it is that we're doing. We're getting out, we're being innovative, we're changing the world, we're in leadership positions, we're the leaders in our communities. And we're very much like Michigan and Great Lakes based. Community is very, very important to us. So whenever we amplify that stuff, it's always focused on our brand pillars and amplifying that community and showcasing what we're doing for the greater world.
Yeah, no. And you know what? I didn't even think about that. But again, what a great opportunity to boost the successes of your students and your alumni, because that not only does that show them that they're an important part of your community and you're celebrating them, but it is such a great way to showcase that your students are doing successful things, which reflects really well on you. So I absolutely love that. I am going to move to the next slide. And this is kind of where we're going to get to the nuts and bolts of listening. Like the actual setting up of listening in your social media management platform. So if you are listening to this and you don't have a social media management platform or tool, this may be less relevant for you. This may be a primer in why a tool like this might be advantageous to you, because it would allow you to automate some of this stuff. But I'm just going to run through the list really quick. And then Ken, if you want, I'm going to ask you to highlight anything that you think is especially important from this list, or if you have any tips or about anything about the kinds of keywords that we have here. But so basically, running through the list of best practices, it's basically just you want to make sure you're tracking the right keywords and hashtags. You want to create tags and labels that allow you to organize the conversations that you're hearing. You want to filter them and review them. So filtering allows you to quickly review things that I think, Taylor, you mentioned it. If this certain word that you know as a trigger word comes up, you can capture that stuff before it's posted live and then review it before it goes live. You can also set up auto responders, so you can listen to something, and if it's after hours, you can say, hey, thank you for reaching out. We'll get back to you tomorrow during the business day. That's an example of an auto responder. One of the things that we have that, is again a feature to look for is being able to assign conversations. And Victoria and Taylor, it'll be interesting to know if you're doing this, but you could actually say, hey, this is a conversation that should be answered by this professor or this student ambassador or whatever. And you can actually assign something that you hear to a specific person to address it. There are Boolean searches, which are a little bit more complicated, and the option to do all of this in one place, which just streamlines it and makes it more reasonable that you're going to put it into your workflow. So Ken, I'm going to ask you first, out of this list of things that you can do to kind of reduce some of the administrative burden of listening, is there anything here that stands out as definitely if you're doing one thing from this list, do this?
Everything you said is great. And I would add that in terms of that assigning conversations to people, zooming back out a little bit to the overall strategy is being thoughtful and curating what that listening campaign, because this is really where you get to the next level. It's one thing to just have the feeds and be monitoring them. It's another thing to have some influence on where the feeds are going. And there's a couple ways that can be done. And what's very important that I see working really well is, let's call them community managers or page admins. So curating that management committee for a group page that would be, maybe an undergrad student, a grad student, a faculty member, and a staff member, all being community managers, and them having a written agreement of who responds to what, and what's on brand for those kinds of responses. Those community managers can also set up conversations, so they can post prompts for people to share things, and then those comments are thoughtfully curated. And then another thing that I think is really, really key is most social media platforms offer surveys. And surveys are a great way to engage and listen, especially you can have your 3 or 4 choices, and then you can have another where people write stuff in, and that qualitative information there, and listening to that qualitative other information in the social media surveys, tons of opportunities there for listening, engaging, and responding.
Yes, and that's a very proactive form of listening, but I do love that as an idea. I'm going to ask the same question to Taylor and to Victoria. Taylor, are you, of this list, if your peer came to you and said, okay, you can, what's the most important thing on this list for listening? What would you tell them?
I think for us, because we are, like I mentioned, social media is just a part of what I do. I think those filters and those keywords are so important, because I am spread between a lot of different things. And so I don't have the time to be scrolling through social media all the time and looking for stuff. And so the ability to go to the platform where I'm already scheduling content, planning content, and being able to filter that way is really, really important for me. And then that gives me the ability I am not the expert on everything veterinary medicine. And so it gives me the opportunity to pull in our faculty members when we've got subject experts across the board. So when I talked about like those disease outbreaks or things that are happening, I know exactly who to go to if I've filtered down to see those searches in the appropriate way.
Yeah. And it's hard to underestimate the value of having that all in one place and easy to parse out to everybody. I mean, that is a huge benefit of having a social media management platform. Victoria, what's the advice you'd give to your peer? What's the one thing off this list they have to be doing?
I would say using social listening to help your SEO strategy is probably one of the most important things that you can do on a social team. We use, those tracking tools for hashtags and competitor analysis and things like that to improve our SEO strategy and to assist with that, because a lot of our content is informed by things that people are searching for, things that people are saying on our social channels, questions people are asking us or Google or, any other platform really. People are using social media as search engines as well. And just tracking everything to see what people are saying, that's going to help not only inform your content, but also know what resources you need when you need help. It's going to inform a lot, and it's going to help de-silo your entire university.
Yeah, no, that's a huge one. That's absolutely a huge one. And I love that you're using it for SEO. And I didn't put that on here, and I should have, because, but again, if you're trying to boost your messages, having that extra having SEO is such a brilliant part of your strategy. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. So, I'm going to move on from kind of that nuts and bolts of inside of your platform, what you can do to set up listening, into something that is challenging for a lot of people when it comes especially to organic social media, which is measuring effectiveness. So it is one thing to put all this stuff in place and to do it. It is a whole other thing to go to your boss and say, I don't know what it did. I don't know how it did. So Ken, this is something you and I have talked about extensively, about measuring, and why that is so important. I always bring it back to UTM codes. But what's the value? If you had to pick the number one value, to somebody working in higher ed social media of having the kind of metrics that prove that they're being effective, what would you say is the most important reason why they need those numbers?
Great question. A lot really depends. If we think of awareness campaigns or conversion campaigns, so awareness is we're getting the school's name out, we're getting more people, we're getting more likes, we're getting more comments. At the end of the day, though, that doesn't really feed the enrollment funnel, or maybe it does. And that's where we're looking for these attribution correlations of, okay, if our engagement is X, does that correlate to the enrollments that are Y? And I think Taylor and Victoria could probably comment on that more. At the end of the day, being in an enrollment team view, or even a crisis management team that's charged with getting social media out there for listening, I would argue that somebody somewhere is saying, hey, what it really comes down to, where the rubber hits the road, is how many more applications are we getting? And or how many more qualified applications, like qualified traffic. So I think at the end of the day, that's the answer. Although I'm open to hearing people share about awareness. Hey, we think awareness is fine, and here's why.
Right. But even if you're trying to drive awareness, like you said, at the end of the day, I'm driving awareness for what purpose? I'm driving awareness just to get more engagement within my community. That's a valid thing that has value. It can affect your fundraising. It can affect your attendance at events. So I was, getting your brand out there is great. But there's also deliverables there that, even if you're not driving enrollments, you want to know how you're performing. We've talked a little bit about UTM codes. I know that Taylor and Victoria are both using them, but I want to just really quickly, for anybody who isn't using UTM codes, UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module. It's a company that Google bought back in 2005 because they had this technology. It allows you to put breadcrumbs in your URLs so that you can know where your traffic is coming from. This can be super relevant when it comes to not just enrollments, like, hey, I clicked send and I came from social media on my application, but also people who sign up for events, people who download brochures, people who come to your website. So that's a little bit about what a UTM code. If anybody wants more information on that, I invite them to reach out to me directly. I can send you some resources. But Victoria, I know you're using UTM codes. I know you're doing a lot of tracking because you are enrollment focused. How important is that in your strategy? The data that's coming from your UTM codes as far as your calls to action and your student journeys.
Yeah, so UTMs are a huge deal. One of the reasons why people in our institution take social so seriously, take our team so seriously, is because we have the data to back up why social is important and how it's affecting enrollment, because we're using UTMs to see what conversion is happening and where it's coming from. And social media is just the number one driver.
Yeah, it's amazing too that until you start putting in UTM codes, how many people don't realize that that's what's happening. Like, until you can prove that number, social media is kind of seen as silly dances. It's not necessarily taken seriously by people, that have been in academia for decades. Like this, when you can prove it, that it's moving the needle, it's much easier to get resources to support social media. Now, Taylor, you're kind of in a different boat because you're not driving enrollments. Are you doing any tracking? Are you using UTM codes? Tell us what your particular usage is here.
So yeah, enrollment, because we have a certain number of spots open in our vet school, enrollment is not our biggest thing that we track. Of course, we want as many applicants as possible because that allows us to pick the highest quality students, and the more applicants we get, the more rigorous we can be about who we're taking. But at the end of the day, we still have roughly 107 seats open, no matter the number of applicants we get. So although it's a part of it, it's definitely not our main focus in terms of what we're getting from social. And so I think the biggest for us is that community involvement, community outreach, and awareness for us. But that can be in terms of specifically events. We've got an open house that we have every year where we invite the public to come to the college, specifically to our vet med campus, and tour the vet school. So pre-vet students are there learning what vet school is about. The community is there learning about veterinary medicine as a whole. That is one of the biggest drivers of our donors, prospective students. It really capitalizes on all of our audiences, in addition to just the awareness of veterinary medicine within our community. And so that's one of the biggest ones that we're tracking social media. And this was the first year that I was on board to be able to create an open house campaign and tracking that to see how many people were RSVPing to the event that we created and things like that. And then specific to the other community outreach activities that we have and just the overall awareness of those articles that we're posting. We're looking at clicks. We're looking at the traction that we're getting on those through social.
So, Taylor, are you willing to share with us where you find your most engagement, where you find your most, now, and I want to be clear when I say engagement, like your most impactful clicking and actual action taking as far as social? What's your platform? What's your social media network that does the best for you? Are you willing to share?
Yeah. So in terms of platforms, Facebook is where we're getting the most traction still. I think it is just, so for our prospective students, we've talked about how the younger generations are moving more towards Instagram, TikTok, things like that. But our audiences, so veterinary students are a little older than undergraduate students too. So we've got that, that perspective, but also we've got parents, community. That's where we're at. And so when it comes to events, we found that if it is information based, they're coming to our Facebook platforms for that. If it is entertainment based, which always ties in, right? We always have that entertainment that ties to something. specific to our goals, that's Instagram for us. But for information and clicks and events, it's Facebook for our audiences.
Interesting. How about you, Victoria? Where do you find, if you're willing to share, like, where do you find your most traction?
So our most traction is Instagram and TikTok.
Okay.
Instagram and TikTok are huge. Our audiences on TikTok are a little bit younger. Our audience on Instagram is alumni and current students and some prospective students. And then Facebook is mainly alumni that are, 15, 20, 30 years out, and also just the larger community, because we are in a small town. And, regardless of whether or not someone attends our university, they're still connected to us in some way. So Facebook is really for an older audience that is a little bit more community based. And then for information style videos, for connecting with current students, for community type of stuff, that's really going to be Instagram. And then for trends, for entertainment, that's going to be TikTok.
Interesting. So I'm going to wrap this up with you guys as far as we're leaving it on this idea of action and enrollments. And I want to make sure that everybody watching this has a chance to attend. Ken and I had a discussion about enrollments. Here is a link to it. But it will allow you to watch specifically how social media can drive enrollments. That's a really good chat. And that's something that you can watch is on this same topic of getting results from organic social for your institutions. We are wrapping it up, guys. This was a great topic. I really hope everybody took their pen and paper and wrote down some of the great information that you shared. Ken, we've come to the end of the listening session. Is there anything that you want to drive home especially, or that you think that we could have spent more time on, or maybe another topic that we could tackle next time? Where'd we leave some room for further discussion, Ken?
It's one of those all of the above questions.
Yeah. And again, with the all with
I
above.
love it. Especially get out your Scantrons, folks. We're in academia. I'm curious next time, or if we had a minute at either of the two schools, how much you're embracing LinkedIn.
Okay. Hey, I not only do I think that would be a super relevant additional topic for us, but we'll throw it out as an encore question to Victoria and to Taylor to round out and finish up the session. Taylor, LinkedIn, thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you see it being important in the future? Is it important now? Tell us.
LinkedIn is probably a pain point for me in my position because I think that it is so vital for what we're doing. But so I've been in my role for 8 months, and LinkedIn just was not prioritized before I got here. And so building our following on LinkedIn is something that that's where I talk about my pain point, right? Is like, we need to be there. And we've got faculty members who are doing research at a very high level, and they only use LinkedIn. They've told me that several times. Right. So we need to be there and we need to have a presence. But right now our engagement is still not where I would like it to be. And so that's kind of what we're fighting with right now, is tailoring our LinkedIn conversations to that audience that wants to see it, but then getting the engagement to actually get some traction on it.
Interesting. Very interesting. It does sound like there might be room for a conversation here around LinkedIn. Victoria, what's your take on LinkedIn as our bonus round question? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
2 thumbs up.
Really?
Yes. We have a huge following on LinkedIn, actually. And we're in the process of adjusting our LinkedIn strategy. We do post regularly. We do have great engagement on that platform. But what we're going to be utilizing it for in the coming years is really revamping our online strategy. So targeting that LinkedIn audience to continued growth, continued education. I think that higher ed is going to be making some adjustments in the future with a declining population, and we're going to have to move closer and closer to more online programs, more trade programs. and we're gonna, really dive deep into that in the future. So establishing your presence on LinkedIn and really getting students immediately on LinkedIn and encouraging our faculty and staff to use it throughout the student journey while they're here, posting all of their achievements while they're here. It helps them. It's kind of like almost like a PR opportunity for them to showcase all of their skills as they're, at Central Michigan and getting all of that hands-on learning opportunity. And then when they graduate, they're well known, they're established, they have connections, they can get a job.
It's so critical for getting a job anymore. Yeah. Like I have to say, Victoria, I would have thought that your position on LinkedIn and Taylor's was flipped. I'm super surprised that you're having such a good engagement with it. So again, maybe this is the topic for the next one, because I do think it is super interesting. And in my perspective, being in corporate, one of the first things I do when I get an application is check LinkedIn. So I think that there's a good point of student education there that you kind of touched on, Victoria. All right, everybody, that wraps up our discussion. Not only have we touched on some really important reasons why you should be listening, how to listen, why to listen, we've also talked a little bit about maybe possibly our next topic, thinking about LinkedIn and how it's impacting students and schools. So thank you for being with me. If you want, I want to give you the opportunity to take a test drive of social media management listening features that are available through AgoraPulse. There's a free demo you can take. It's easy peasy. No one's going to try to sell you anything, but they can walk you through what the listening feature looks like if that's interesting to you. So until next time, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to that LinkedIn conversation. So talk to you guys soon. Thanks again. Bye.